CNBC TV 18, celebrating 15 years of leadership.
The top story tonight, the Delhi High Court throws a spanner into the government's plans to auction coal blocks. HC asks the centre not to auction 2 coal blocks run by Jindal Steel Power, quashes the centre's decision to change the end use of these 2 blocks. Hope for Bhushan Steel and others fighting similar cases rises.
I would be forced to go back to nationalisation rather than try and encourage wider participation.
The Power and Coal Minister Piyush Goyal tells CNBC TV 18 exclusively the government will be forced to nationalise coal blocks if auctions are stalled. Coal Secretary tells CNBC TV 18 exclusively the technical committee will give its review in a week.
American depository receipts of over 50 Indian companies will soon be trading on Wall Street. Securities of TCS, Bajaj Finance, United Breweries, Britannia, among others, will be available for trading in the US thanks to the government's new depository receipts regime.
The odds that we get some sort of a short-term deal are reasonably good. The medium and longer-term outlook, to me, is still quite troubling.
The co-CEO of Deutsche Bank, Anshu Jain, hopeful of a short-term deal to keep Greece in the Eurozone, but lays down fears of a contagion if Greece does exit the currency. Jain also believes that Modi government is on the right track as the challenges are immense.
The recovery gathers steam on Dalal Street. Markets rise for the second day running. The Sensex rises nearly 200 points. The Nifty reclaims 8,600.
How can 2,000 crores for Bajaj Auto be progressive development and 200 crores for those who don't get water be unsustainable socialism?
Rajiv Bajaj hails the Aam Aadmi Party's victory in Delhi, says BJP's top-down approach will be complemented by AAP's ability to effect grassroots changes, also dismisses concerns raised about AAP's economic policies.
The government takes stock of the progress made to improve the ease of doing business. Sources say the centre feels it has a limited role as courts will have to be more proactive in enforcing contracts. Meanwhile, Oil Ministry bats for a conciliatory approach with investors to cut down on litigation.
The NASSCOM 2015 summit kicks off a day after the industry body pegged growth at 12 to 14% in FY16. The sector's bigwigs are cautiously optimistic about beating that forecast.
8,000 crore का इन्वेस्टमेंट नया रायपुर में हो गया है.
Chhattisgarh Chief Minister Raman Singh plans to give his state a facelift, promises world-class infrastructure for IT companies as he gears up to build a new smart city near Raipur.
US Treasury Secretary Jack Lew in India meets the who's who of India Inc. in Mumbai, applauds the Modi government's efforts to revive growth, urges India to open up its economy to American companies.
Performance car of the year.
The performance car of the year is the Jaguar F-Type Coupe.
Performance bike of the year.
The performance bike of the year is the Triumph Daytona 675R.
Hatchback of the year.
Hyundai Elite i20.
Sedan of the year.
The winner, ladies and gentlemen, is the Toyota Corolla.
Well, it's the Oscars for Motown, a glittering ceremony in the national capital as the best cars and bikes are recognized at the CNBC TV 18 Overdrive Awards. Good evening and thanks for joining us here on India Business Hour. I'm Tara Rai. Subi Upadhyay joining me from the Mumbai studio. Subi, what would you do to get that Jaguar?
Let's not go there. For starters, I have to start counting a lot in terms of, the change that I need to stack up. That's going to take a long time. It's going to take more than the entire duration of India Business Hour. So right now, straight away to the top story, and the markets, that is, the recovery is slowly gathering steam on the Lal Street. Market snapped a 7-day losing streak yesterday, and that's been followed up with another solid session today. The Sensex gained nearly 200 points to reclaim the 28,500 mark. The Nifty added over 60 points to get back above 8,600. Mid-caps, however, outperformed the blue chips by a huge margin. The mid-cap index was up nearly 2% in trade. Well, Citi's Pankaj Vaish believes that India will continue to attract foreign inflows and adds that the weakness in earnings is only a temporary blip. Listen.
For the last several months, anybody who said to me, aren't they running ahead? Yeah, but that's the animal, right? It always runs a bit ahead, and for good effect, because it actually can provide the right environment for people to raise capital. So I see nothing wrong in that. I just think there was certain pullback that was necessary because you were hitting some good levels, good targets.
Right, that's the action from today's equity markets as well as an expert view for you. Moving on, TCS, Bajaj Finance, United Breweries, Z Entertainment, NTPC, Britannia, Unitech, Apollo Tyres. Very soon, ADRs of over 50 Indian companies will trade over the counter in the United States. Bank of New York Mellon has, in the past 1 month, made a slew of filings for Level 1 unsponsored ADRs. So whether these companies like it or not, their securities are going to indirectly be available for trading in the US. Menika Doshi now joining us. Menika, explain this to us. What exactly does it mean? Can the companies do anything about it if they actually don't like it?
Well, I think they can't, but this is consequent, Nayantara, to the government's new Depository Receipt Scheme 2015, which permits for the first time the establishment of both sponsored and unsponsored ADRs, level 1 ADRs. These are non-capital raising ADRs. Now, what's the difference between a sponsored ADR? The issuer company is involved in a sponsored ADR. In an unsponsored ADR, the issuer company is not involved. Today, we're talking about unsponsored ADRs. They are created, like I said, by a foreign depository bank without the participation or consent of the issuer company. So that's to answer your first question, Nayantara. Even if these companies don't like it, there's very little they can do to stop it thanks to this new government policy and notification, which is exciting in parts, and because it's new, it's also strange and scary in other parts. Now, since this scheme became effective on December 15, 2014, Bank of New York Mellon has filed for over 50 such unsponsored ADRs, including for companies such as TCS, Bajaj Finance, Apollo Tyres, United Breweries, Piramal Enterprises, Britannia, Just Dial, Unitech, MRF, Siemens, Aurobindo Pharma, NTPC, Power Grid, Ramco Cements, Voltas, Motherson Sumi. I won't go through all 50, but I did put a bunch of names up there so that you can know now that the securities of these companies, that is the ADRs of these companies, will trade in the OTC markets. These are the over-the-exchange or over-the-counter markets in the US. BNY Mellon, I spoke to them and has confirmed that it has filed with the US Securities and Exchange Commission, which is SEC, to establish several unsponsored depository receipt programs from India. This decision was made following the recent notification by India's Ministry of Finance of the new Depository Receipt Scheme 2014, which became effective in mid-December. The new scheme permits for the first time unsponsored depository receipts with respect to securities of Indian companies. So that's the comment coming in from BNY Mellon. It's not clear when these new ADRs will start trading in these OTC markets and whether all these companies even know about this development. To be clear, their consent is not required, as I've been stressing, but I don't even know whether they know about this. Bankers tell me the full process to establish an unsponsored ADR can take between 4 to 8 weeks, and once the filing is done, it can take as little as 3 to 4 days to get the ADRs traded. So we're trying to find out from BNY Mellon when these ADRs will start trading.
So, Menika, let me ask you, a quick question here. What's in it then for a bank like, Bank of in New York? or any other participant for that matter, since the promoters aren't involved, I'm guessing there's no change in the capital base, right? Because these are unsponsored ADRs, as you're saying.
There's no change in the capital base. There is no new capital being raised. Essentially, foreign depositories establish these kinds of DR programs to make securities that are otherwise unavailable to foreign investors available in their own home market. So there would be a bunch of American investors that don't want to come to India either through the FPI route or the sub-account route or even the PN note route, participatory note route, and they want to be able to trade in their own home markets, which they can now do via these unsponsored DR programs, as they're called, on their own OTC market. So that's why foreign custodian banks or foreign depository banks like BNY Mellon establish these programs. And I think, there are, I'm just going to sort of pull up one graphic plate that I had put up for later on. There are over 2,000 such depository receipt programs that trade in the US, which is the biggest such market. And I think one banker told me that the estimated investment in these DRs is, above $70 to $80 billion. So it's a fairly vibrant market and a new way to reach new investors, so to speak.
And a direct way for foreign investors to actually trade in
a direct way for those investors, very indirect for Indian companies because they're not involved in the process at all.
US investors
so
who might be interested in
for those home investors, US investors, this is a good way to do it. But, the question about when these DRs will start trading is still pending, and that's because some banks tell me that they're awaiting some guidelines from SEBI to play out. They're hoping that some process guidelines will come in from SEBI. They're also hoping for some headroom monitoring by NSTL, because essentially all these DRs will be counted towards foreign investment limits for these Indian companies here, depending on which sectors they are and what sectoral limits apply, so to speak. So I think some depository banks are still waiting for those guidelines. Once these guidelines come in, I expect that 50 could go to 100 and 150 very, very quickly. I think that's the important thing to underline here. And there is a note of caution for the companies involved here, though they're not really directly involved. One is that, there are some certain circumstances under which these companies could be exposed to higher sort of compliance requirements by the SEC. For instance, if your total number of US investors exceeds 300 in a fiscal year, you have to make certain new filings with the SEC. Okay. So that's something companies will have to watch out for. And legal liabilities. Your securities are now trading in another market, and those laws will apply to you. So I think lawyers and companies are sort of figuring out what the way ahead is. But this is, new, exciting, strange, a little scary, and interesting developments over the months to come.
All right, Manika, thanks so much for getting us that very interesting story. All right, Nayanthara, over to you. So this is what we have on the securities market front. But the other big story that's come in from the Delhi High Court.
That's right. The Delhi High Court has thrown a spanner into the government's plans to auction coal blocks. The court has told the centre not to auction 2 coal blocks that are run by Jindal Steel and Power. This after the company approached the High Court against the centre's decision to change the end use of these 2 blocks in question. Ashmit Kumar now joining us with the details of that story. Ashmit, you were there in the Delhi High Court. Take us through what the court had to say.
It's a big relief coming in for JSPL, with the Delhi High Court holding in their favour concerning their petition with respect to the 2 coal blocks in question, the change of end use of the coal blocks in question, and many say that this could have a spillover effect onto the government's plans of having a smooth, glitch-free coal block auctions. Now, just to go into the details here, JSPL had moved the Delhi High Court with respect to their 2 coal blocks in question. The concern that they had raised is that they've invested significantly towards the end-use steel plant in question, which investments north of 19,000 crore rupees. Now, what JSPL argued is that the government, by way of a notification, had changed the end use from steel to power, thereby making the company JSPL ineligible to participate in the auctions with respect to these 2 coal blocks. Now, despite several concerns being raised by the government, Delhi High Court has set those concerns aside, has upheld JSPL's contention, and in very clear terms directing that the coal blocks in questions, that's Utkal B1, Utkal B2, as well as Gare Palma 4/6, will be withdrawn from the auctions, will be excluded from the auctions, and that these 3 coal blocks will now go before a technical committee, a government-appointed technical committee, that will look into the government's decision, that will review the government's decision of change of end use from steel to power. So a big relief coming in as far as JSPL is concerned, and many say that this too could have a spillover effect across various companies that are in fact prospective bidders in the ongoing coal block auctions. Back to you.
Ashmit, also do tell us about some of these other related cases, because that's the big concern as to how many more litigants will we see moving the courts. What kind of impact could this verdict on JSPL have on the entire auction process?
Well, indeed, and though today's order confines itself only to the three blocks in question as far as JSPL's petition is concerned, but it will have a spillover effect onto the other companies, various other players that are currently, that were awaiting queues, that were awaiting clarity with respect to going forward on this question of change of end use. And just to go into the details here, just this morning we had Bhushan Steel and Power that moved the Delhi High Court, that raised a number of concerns, chief amongst them, of course, being that question on change of end use. They've also raised other questions of the two-stage tender process, of the clarity with respect to capital costs, but nonetheless drawing the focus back onto that question of change of end use. That's one litigant. The other litigant is Sova Ispat. We understand that a similar petition with respect to change of end use is again pending before the MP High Court, and these are just the players who have taken recourse to legal remedies. There are a number of other players who didn't choose to go ahead with the legal recourse, but nonetheless have been keeping a very close eye on these developments. The companies include the likes of Hindalco, which also stand to get impacted, which are also suffering from this change of end use, which are eyeing the developments very carefully. So clearly a case in point that this is one development that will have a spillover effect, a domino effect onto various other bidders that will be going forward and then raising this question, seeking clarity from the government. So clearly this is one development that is not confined only to JSPL. Today's order is, but this development clearly is not confined to JSPL and will have far-reaching consequences on the government's coal block auction plans. Back to you.
It's right, Ashmi. It's going to be very interesting to see if this court verdict is going to have a domino effect. Jindal Steel and Power today up by almost 6% in trade, and even Bhushan Steel up by almost 3.5%. Now, what does the government have to say? The Coal and Power Minister Piyush Goyal, a guest at the CNBC TV18 Overdrive Awards currently underway, said the government will be forced on the path of nationalisation if the coal block auctions are indeed stalled. Here's more from the minister.
Shireen just asked me what happens if the participants succeed in stalling the auction. I said there's no problem. On 31st of March, all these coal blocks go to the custodian, and the custodian or the government is not the sufferer. The government will continue to produce the coal. Only the effort to involve all of you, to involve the private sector, to give end users the ability to determine their own future, to have fuel supply under their control, will certainly get affected. And in effect, I would be forced to go back to nationalization rather than try and encourage wider participation in the coal sector, in the mining sector.
All right. Now, CNBC TV18's Anshu Sharma caught up with Coal Minister Piyush Goyal on the sidelines of the Overdrive Awards to quiz him further about the ramifications of the High Court's order.
We respect the court's orders. The lawyers will obviously see what they have to do in respect of this order. And if it has to be reassessed by the technical committee, they can always reassess it. But the rest of the auction goes on as usual.
Companies have also problem with the compensation issues. Government has come out with compensation plans, but government has also come out with its report on compensation that if there is any changes, it can be adjusted in the future. So companies feel that they are betrayed because they have already submitted their technical bids. So how are you going to deal with that?
No, there's no betrayal. There already was a process in the ordinance that if anybody is aggrieved by any decisions, they can go to a tribunal. It is only reiterating what is already the right of every company. The payment commissioner is a very distinguished gentleman who has assessed all the papers presented by the prior allottees, who have been termed illegal and arbitrary by the Honorable Supreme Court. We had a very transparent mechanism to assess the compensation payable. Should anybody have a problem, he's always free to go to the tribunal. And if there is a genuine investment that has gone into a coal block, which may have either escaped the attention or notice or was not presented correctly earlier, one can always reassess it. I think in the wider perspective of the coal blocks, the ability of the coal blocks to give fuel to the power plants and other end-use requirements, I think this issue will not stall or will not dampen the spirit of the bidders.
Would you like to revisit your compensation and land issues after you're done with auctioning of Schedule 2 coal blocks? Because it seems that the government is in a hurry to auction it even before coal ordinance is passed in the parliament.
It's not a hurry. The Supreme Court, Honorable Supreme Court, has given 6 months within which we had to conclude the process so that the coal production continues uninterrupted and the country does not face a shortage of coal and a shortage of power. I think this government has done all that it could in a very transparent and honest manner to ensure continuity of coal output from these mines. I would have been happier if people had supported and allowed this to proceed as in the normal course. But if anybody is aggrieved, he can always go to the tribunal and seek to get his opportunity to have his say.
That's the Coal Minister Piyush Goyal on the road ahead, especially after the roadblock that's come with the Delhi High Court verdict. Now let's get to all the top global stories at this hour. A big day for Greece and the Eurozone. The region's finance ministers are meeting in Brussels to try and find a solution and clear the impasse on the Greek debt crisis. The Greek finance minister expected to ask for a 6-month bridging loan. He may also push for lower budget surplus targets and only implement 70% of the austerity program. Don't forget, the Greek defense minister has said if the Eurozone ministers don't agree, Greece will have no choice but to look elsewhere for a solution. Hoping for an outcome, we have seen the European markets on tender hooks today. They opened tepid in trade. The FTSE currently down about 0.5%. The German DAX flattish with a negative bias. The French CAC, meanwhile, down by about 24 points at the moment. Let's head across to Wall Street and tell you how the shares are trading at the moment. You have the Dow down by about 80 points. The Nasdaq about 0.3% in the green. The S&P 500 down by about 4 points. So we have the big interview.
All right, let's move straight to it then. So if Greece exits the Eurozone, how big an impact will it have on the markets? Deutsche Bank's co-CEO Anshu Jain believes that the impact and the fears of contagion will be minimal. However, Jain said that nobody in Europe wants Greece to exit, and he's hopeful of a short-term deal as the Eurozone finance ministers meet in Brussels. Appearing as a guest on CNBC's Squawk Box, Jain also spoke about India and Prime Minister Modi. Let's take a look.
Nobody wants Greece to exit the Eurozone. The sanctity of the Eurozone is very important to all players on both sides of the fence. But undoubtedly, I think the promises that have been made through the election process by the leaders of Greece now pits them into a position.
What's your trading desk betting? How are they positioned? Let's ask it that way.
Can't talk about trading positions, obviously, but I would say that I think the odds that we get some sort of a short-term deal are reasonably good. The medium and longer-term outlook, to me, is still quite troubling.
What do you think would happen if Greece did exit the Eurozone? How messy could it get?
We have to break this into 3 segments, in my opinion. First and foremost, the last time around, we were talking about this. The roughly 300 billion euros of debt that Greece has were heavily held in private sector hands, a lot of it with other European banks. So the possibility of contagion was much higher than it is today. Today is down to about 20% last I checked. The concern really would be a domestic concern for Greece itself, because if you start getting deposit flight, which we've been seeing, as much as 10 billion euros out of the Greek banking system in the last month or thereabouts, if that continues, the prospect of social unrest and so on does become quite real. But I would definitely say that the broader contagion worries are lower in my head than they would have been a few years ago.
Would you agree with the assessment of a David Tepper, who told us yesterday that he doesn't think a Greek exit would be such a dramatically negative impact for the market, that it may have a blip of 2, 3, 4%, but otherwise the market would be fine? The market's better able to handle this news today?
We're still talking about 300 billion euros of debt. We're still talking about 20% of that being held in private sector hands. We're talking about the implications of that for the rest of Europe. So this is no small thing. But I would agree that the worry that we would have had a few years ago, one, of the very high levels of private ownership, but secondly, we had other indebted countries in Europe, and we didn't have the ECB programs that we have today. So yes, one can take comfort from the fact that real institutions have been built and progress has been made in other parts of Europe in the last 2 or 3 years.
What do you think Modi's doing, and how's he doing, and how quickly do you think some of the things he's talked about may actually come true?
We took some German industry leaders and some global sovereign wealth funds as well. India has underperformed its potential for a very long period of time. And actually, I was there just a few days after the US president was there leading a very senior delegation as well. So there are a number of countries at this point that believe that the wind is blowing from a different direction. Yes, I believe he is sincere about changing actually the fundamental business model of India. He wants to go with an East Asian made in India.
A lot of people believe he's sincere, but there's other people who question whether he can get it done.
Degree of complexity, very hard. Undoubtedly moving up 1.2 billion population with it's got a very low rating in terms of ease of doing business. The challenges of India are well known, but the potential is so dramatic that even if incrementally he can make progress, they're assured of reasonably high GDP growth and hence real opportunities for international debt.
There's Deutsche Bank there with his views on what could happen in the Eurozone and where the Lal Street is headed. With that, we're going to wrap up this edition of India Business Hour. Good night.
Thank you for watching.